Years ago, I was living outside of Buffalo, New York, on an old estate on the Lake Erie shore. I rented the carriage house of an old mansion that a doctor and his wife owned. The doctor was a heart surgeon, and they were a well-to-do couple with multiple properties, so they weren't around that often. I liked the solitude of the place, having just gotten divorced, and although the carriage house was slightly decrepit, I loved living there. The mansion looked over the lake, and my house was closer to the road, off a private drive that went from one side of the estate to the other. The carriage house had been servants' quarters for whoever lived in the mansion at the turn of the 20th century. There was an enclosed courtyard outside my door that was bordered by the back of my house, the carriage barn, which had stored carriages back in the horse and buggy days, a row of empty horse stalls, and a brick wall with an entrance into the courtyard. It was a very cool place to live. The rent was cheap, and there was a private 150-foot beach that was hardly ever used by anybody but me. But it was very isolated if there was nobody staying in the mansion, and there weren't any close neighbors because all the houses along the road were big estates, and a lot of the rich people living in the area weren't full-time residents. But I was young and brave, and it was a big estate full of decaying spookiness, and I'm a weirdo that likes that kind of stuff. So I was overjoyed to find the place. One night I was coming home late, around 1 a.m. from a friend's house. Driving down a street a mile or two from my house, I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing close to the road. I thought that was kind of odd, because it was late at night on a weekday, not exactly party time in the Buffalo South towns. I started to get a little nervous, because the person was standing as if they were waiting for someone to pick them up. And as I got closer, I could see they were wearing an unusual, black, shroud-like thing. Long and dark and draped, with part of it wrapped over the person's head to look like a hood. Similar to someone wearing an abaya and a hijab, only much looser, like a bunch of material just wrapped around someone's body. It seemed totally inappropriate to what I knew of the people that lived in the area to see anybody wearing anything like that, and certainly not outside at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. The person was just standing by the side of the road, looking stooped over and old. I slowed down to a crawl as I approached, worried that the person needed help. Maybe it was an old, senile person that had walked out of their house in the middle of the night. Confused? When I got close enough to really see the person, she lifted her head and looked my way, and I saw that it was my ex-mother-in-law. I was absolutely, positively sure it was her. The same gray-brown hair, the same eyes, the same enigmatic smile that had always made me wonder what she was thinking about, but never saying. She raised her hand and waved at me. Not a stop and help me wave, but more of a gosh, it's good to see you wave. It scared the hell out of me. My mother-in-law had died 3 years previous to when I was driving down that road. I sped up and kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But after a few minutes and a few deep breaths, I told myself I should go back and take another look. My mother-in-law had loved me. I couldn't imagine her ghost would appear seeking revenge on me for divorcing her son, who had not treated me well, to say the least. I drove in a square by making left turns and went down the same road again, but there was no one there. I was too freaked out to go back to my spooky carriage house with the weird sounds and 100-year-old history, with nobody there but me and the ghosts I was convinced probably inhabited the place. So I drove to the local all-night Greek diner and sat there for an hour drinking coffee and calming my nerves. When I finally drove home and into the courtyard, I could see that something was wrong. My door was standing open, the glass windows broken, the door cracked almost all the way through from one side to the other. Someone had destroyed the door to get into the house. The next day, I found a crowbar in the courtyard, thrown off to the side. The only things I noticed missing from the house were a few pieces of my clothing, super creepy, a jar of loose change, and a knife from the kitchen. I was just divorced and not exactly rich. I didn't have much worth stealing. It's very scary when someone breaks into the house you live in all by yourself in an isolated spot. They must have driven right into the courtyard and would have been hidden from view while they broke down the door. I called the cops. They never caught anyone. With all the upset of the break-in, it wasn't until hours later that I remembered seeing my dead mother-in-law waving at me from the side of the road, dressed like the Grim Reaper. I'm convinced that she somehow appeared to delay me from going home. That if I had driven straight to the carriage house, whoever the person or persons were who had broken my solid wood, 100-year-old door practically in half with a crowbar, might have been waiting there for me. Or I could have surprised them. And that things might have turned out very differently. Maybe very badly, for me. Now I write fictional horror stories. I even wrote a whole ghost story novel. But this story is 100% real life true. I swear on my ex-mother-in-law's grave it really happened. You might even say that seeing Mom by the side of the road that night is part of the reason I write scary stories. So it's my recommendation that people should remember to be nice to their mothers-in-law. She might help you out even after she's dead. A few towns away from mine, there is a place called Brent's Lake. It's on a long, narrow gravel road in the middle of nowhere. The story behind the place is this. There was an old man who owned the road named Brintz. Somewhere throughout history, the spelling was changed. Brintz was an alcoholic who owned slaves and was really mean to his wife. Rumor has it that he would murder and bury his tenants in his backyard, and even did the same to his wife. Brintz later died from a cold, or something like that, and many people say that he haunts the lake. It's not just him that haunts that place. There is a hangman's tree at the lake itself, and there's even a spot of dirt. No matter how deep you dig, it appears burnt. Where people say that witchcraft was practiced back in the day. So when I heard all of this, my 16-year-old self just had to go explore. We arrived around midnight one night. When we got there, we pulled down the road and towards the boat ramp. When I stepped out of the truck, I got chills all over, which was strange because it was dead summer, 100 degrees. As I walked towards the lake, I heard the gravel kick up behind me. I assumed that it was my then boyfriend, so I didn't pay much attention to it until I heard it. Suddenly, I heard the footsteps stop, and I heard a horse neigh and literally felt its breath on the back of my neck. I slowly turned around and saw nothing there. I turned back around and was going to walk back down the boat ramp to the water. That's when I heard the footsteps again, but this time something pushed me. It pushed me so hard I practically flew into the lake. My second time going to Brent's Lake didn't last as long as my first time, but it's defiantly more terrifying. Me and my dad decided to drive out one morning around 10 a.m. We arrived around 10:35 or so, and we pulled towards the lake. The car died. We thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. We got out of the car and walked to lake, which was about a 10-minute walk, stood at the water for no longer than a minute, and heard a scream. It sounded so much like a woman screaming for help. But remember the panther the state let loose a few years prior? Me and my dad decided to just walk back to the car before we run into it. All in all, we were gone away from the car for no longer than 35 minutes max. When we finally got the car to turn back on, which took another 10 minutes, we headed back towards the house. We got about halfway home when my mom called and asked us when we were coming back. I told her we haven't been gone long, but we should be home in just a minute. That's when she told me that we had been gone for over 4 hours. I didn't believe her because the clock on the car radio read 11:35. I hung up with my mom and looked at the time on my phone, and sure enough, the time on my phone read 2:48 p.m. To this day, me and my dad have no idea how we lost 4 hours of our lives when we were only gone for about an hour and a half. That was the last time I went to Brent's Lake, and I honestly don't think I will ever go back. So if you're ever around the border of Marshall and Benton County in northern Mississippi, do not go to Brent's Lake. That lake is in a place that is not ours. The lake no longer, if it ever did, belong to humans. Brent's Lake is a place for the undead, the lost, and to humans, it's extremely dangerous.